Aloha and welcome to Island Connections. I'm Ibrahim Aoude, and our topic tonight is Indigenous Rights 2005. And to discuss this topic, we have our guests, Noelani Goodyear-Kaʻopua. She's with Hālau Māna Public Charter School. And Kavika Tengan, he's Assistant Professor of Ethnic Studies and Anthropology at University of Hawai'i, Mānoa. And we have ʻImai Winchester. He's also from Hālau Māna Public Charter School. Welcome all, and thank you very much for coming. So, Indigenous rights. But before we go into this, maybe let's get some idea about what you folks are doing, and how this relates to our topic, which is Indigenous rights and Kanaka Maoli identity, etc. So, if we may begin with you, Noelani.
Sure. So I work at Hālau Māna Public Charter School, and we're one of an alliance actually of Hawaiian charter schools that are community-based and focused on Hawaiian cultural education. And it's actually very related to the issue of Indigenous rights, because when a lot of the different communities who started to organize these various schools began them, that was one of the things that we talked about was the rights of Indigenous people to have our own forms of education, to control our own schools, and the way that we taught our own children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. And ʻImai, you also work with Kumana Charter School, right?
Yeah.
So could you say what do you do there, and give us some idea about those kinds of issues that you deal with?
Well, one of the unique things about Hālau Māna is a hands-on learning program. Our school is actually divided into 5 different groupings. Mm-hmm. We have lo'i, va'a, he'ia, kokula kai, and kokula uka.
Could you explain those?
Okay, yeah. Well, in our first project, lo'i, they're put into a grouping, the students are. This is specifically for high school. Say about 20 or so kids that they go, along with their academics in school, they take them out into the field and actually work and learn how to produce, how to make, how to create, how to maintain a lo'i, different types of stuff like that. In the He'ia project, which is the one that I'm working with, alongside with the Paipaio He'ia at down in Kaneohe, we work alongside with them, teaching the kids, from basic social studies to English, math, and then again their focus for science would be the He'ia specific projects. They do various projects throughout that site. Va'a is, again, it runs along the same lines, but it's more specific to sailing. I think the kids are working right now on sanding, repainting, I think lashing. Before they even get into the water, they need to learn how to assemble a double hull canoe that we have, kanehuna moku. Kokula uka. This goes into our kaikaina, which is our 6th to 8th graders. They learn mountain-specific skills along with their academic rigor. Kokula kai, again, the kai part being they're working in the ocean, more ocean sciences. They're headed by another pretty good staff members that we have over there. For me, again, I'm with the He'ia project, so I work alongside with the Paipaio He'ia gang.
Okay, that's good. And Tai, would you like to tell us how you approach your teaching and so on, and what do you teach? And
okay. Well, aloha. Thank you for having us here. My name is Kavika Tengan. I'm from Maui, and I teach in Anthropology and Ethnic Studies. The courses I teach usually focus on issues of Hawaiian Pacific culture, politics, and within those discussions, we have a lot of discussions about rights. Personally, I'm involved in a few different community organizations. One is called the Halimua, which is a Hawaiian men's cultural organization, which was developed to really help men reconnect with kuleana. And that's another concept which is related to rights, but also includes responsibilities, learning kind of their roles today as modern Hawaiian men. Another organization that I'm a part of is called Hui Malamai Nā Kupuno Hawaiʻi, which deals with the repatriation and reburial issues. and specifically with regards to Hawaiian rights for burials and protections of these burial sites, the iwi, the bones, the moipu, the burial objects, and a whole host of relationships dealing with kuleana with regards to these sites and maintaining them.
Yeah, so I mean, you're all steeped in Native Hawaiian culture, and you, ʻImai, also in the graduate program in political science about Indigenous master program, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when you hear then something like what happened with Kamehameha Schools, for instance, how does that, how do you react? How does that grab you? Noelani?
Well, we're all actually Kamehameha School graduates
all right, there
as well. So we have, multiple personal and political connections and interests in that issue. For me, I was really devastated to hear not only the decision, but also to think about the ways that the arguments about the school being racist, have been issued. And one of the things that we know is that the mission of Kamehameha and some of the things that it has tried to do is to remedy a history of racism that's really put Hawaiians in many ways at the bottom of all kinds of socioeconomic indicators. For myself, I don't know if I would be a PhD, probably not, and have the kinds of access to different things that I have now if I hadn't had the opportunities that Kamehameha afforded me through the graciousness of our ali'i Pauahi. So that is devastating in one sense, and it also shows that how the United States as a whole is far removed from indigenous rights, whether we're talking about Kanaka Maoli or Native American tribes and so on, and they stick to they argue things about in terms of race, basically, whereas actually the question is not really race. I mean, when you talk to students about those kinds of issues, say like in Hawaii and the Pacific, you took also that kind of course, and Hawaii and the Pacific. So what do you tell them about those particular issues as regards to indigenous rights, say Native Hawaiian for that matter?
Well, I try to emphasize the kind of historical development of these specific cases, depending on which ones I'm looking at. So with regards to Hawai'i and Native Hawaiian rights and identity, there's kind of, I try to ground that in the history, kind of pre-kingdom developments of culture on the land and chiefdoms and associations of people with their ohana, with their ahupua'a, issues of mo'okua, how genealogies, how they reach farthest into the deepest, darkest night, the kumulipo, how that's a source of kind of identity and knowledge of oneself and history. Kuleana responsibilities that are associated with particular stations in life or jobs or works, so forth. Then kind of the development of the Hawaiian kingdom as a nation state, which had its own set of laws and understandings of the rights of its citizenry. The Aboriginal Hawaiians, I think what is being seen today in a lot of new research is the ways in which their rights in the constitutions were basically enshrined in terms of having this undivided interest in the kingdom and the lands as well as native tenants, which are distinctly different from other citizens and from other classes of ali'i as well. So you also then kind of have the invasion, inclusion of American norms and kind of Western imperialism that then starts to infiltrate in different ways. And really kind of after 1887, you have a lot of transformations in the kingdom, which leads to the illegal overthrow in 1893 and then the illegal annexation in 1898 and so forth. And this whole corpus of American laws and ideas that are kind of being developed in the occupied kingdom and now kind of known as a territory, then state and what have you. And you have a whole set of understandings of rights in American law that are developing with regards to the relationships between the United States and their indigenous peoples. And in the kind of post-70s era, you now have a new understanding with Hawaiians that are kind of reconnecting through their participation in cultural nationalist movements or in other forms of reconnecting with history and identity, and taking up a whole set of rights as indigenous people that are emerging from transnational indigenous rights movements, as well as reconnecting with these longer histories, looking for ways and models from the past as a plan for action in the future. So it gets a little confusing sometimes, but you try to spend some time talking about these specific developments and how they're often kind of bundled up today in not really easily untangable ways.
Yeah, because as you were talking, I was thinking that in fact all these things that you folks are doing is part and parcel of the Hawaiian Renaissance movement, whether it is in cultural terms or political terms. And in fact, another reflection would be is that the Native Hawaiian movement, the sovereignty movement, whichever way we conceive that, is at the core of Hawaii politics at this point. I mean, you only have to look at you know, the most recent gubernatorial election where like Linda Lingle would talk about Native Hawaiian rights. Everybody is jumping on that wagon and so on. But so it is rather important, you know, what you folks are doing. So the reason I asked the question of Noelani about, you know, Kamehameha Schools is because there is a certain kind of attack on Native Hawaiian rights. I mean, we only have to recall Rice versus Caetano. I mean, that was the opening salvo in a big way, really. So do you folks talk with your students, ʻImai, about those kinds of issues in terms of Hawaiian rights and attacks on Hawaiian rights, and what could be done, or what do you do along those lines?
We approach history a little different at Hālau Kumana, especially through the courses that I take charge of. Again, I'm a product of Kamehameha Schools, of the Hawaiian Studies Department, and now the Political Science Department. So I have all of these, the string of genealogy behind me that I try to take into the classroom and try in some way to make our kids understand that. The best way, the most successful thing that I've been able to do, hopefully, and our kids may disagree, but is actually put the culture aspect, you know, as the main topic. So we talk a lot about aloha, pono, and kuleana, which is what Ty was talking a lot about, because these are like the foundation of who we are as a Hawaiian people. You know, it's our identity. We need to know what a kuleana is. So a lot of the subjects that we go through throughout history, through our history especially, we try to focus on the three main values being aloha, pono, and kuleana. Kuleana being where they come in, pono being how they behave, aloha being how they appreciate one another, and hopefully by learning it through history, which was my sort of focus, I guess, at the school, being involved with different organizations, participating in different rallies, attending different symposium, conferences, going through the gamut. For me, it's really important to explain it to our keiki as best as possible in terms of culture, because that's what they understand. That's what makes our school special, I believe. It's very important to us as a collective Hālau that our kids are continually pounded in with this ideas of kuleana, pono, aloha. In fact, our school is pretty much the foundation pretty much lies in those three main values. So more so for high school is what I teach. I think to frame it in a cultural context makes it a lot easier for them. Our kids are really akamai. They can pick it up really quick. They've had teachers before I was even here that had already laid some pretty good foundational stones for me to kind of traverse right now. So I think it's become a process more so than an experience that the kids, have to go through. They enjoy it. They enjoy learning about what happened through a Hawaiian perspective rather than an American history book. Because so many of our kumu are involved in different organizations, affiliations, protests, what have you. We try as best we can to project, what's the word that I should use? Project what is pono to our kids so that, you know, they can make decisions. I mean, we're not asking them to be like us. We're asking them to be responsible when they leave school, take care of their own kuleana, their family. So a lot of it is based around the culture and how they can take that home is the goal, I think.
Yeah, well, that's good.
I just wanted to comment on that. I think a lot of the men that I work with in the Hālau, they're of a little bit older generation, you know, that did not grow up in a time where it was good to be Hawaiian, right? A lot of them did not have the language or have the kind of access to knowledge of history and culture that now is kind of afforded us. And oftentimes it's always their wish that to see the next generation kind of carry on where they couldn't. And I know that schools like Hālau Kumana are very visible in the community when they do appear at those public functions, such as we had that recent couple weeks ago, that Kuikapono March that was out in Kukani Local. And the students were there marching out in the rain, and it was really inspiring. A lot of the people that I spoke to that, you know, are a little bit older than me or our age, they're, wow, look at those kids. They're really coming out there and standing up for Hawaiian rights, for their history, for whatever else it is that they've come to stand for. And I think it's really important because it kind of gives our generation and those above us and after us that desire, that inspiration to kind of carry on when we see it actually coming to fruition in the children who actually are here and participating in these protests and other events.
And also by that act, I think it really speaks volumes to the progress that the schools are making. Ourselves and Hālau Lokahi, along with a number of other schools, are active in the community. It's a community-based school. So we like to get onto the community and participate. Special note to that, our kids had actually they volunteered to participate in the march. A bunch of the kumu and I got together. We had a little sleepover at the house, and the kids actually dressed in malo, learned the hula the night before, prepped ho'okupu, and we actually marched from from Noelani, my home where I grew up in, all the way out to Kukani Local in the rain. And I think that by that act, not one complaint. We had positive Hawaii Lono the entire way, and I think for the kids, it's a invaluable lesson. I think that they gave us, as well as that they learned.
Sure, you learn from them, they learn from you. Yeah, Noelani, you were gonna say something.
I was gonna say that, you know, both of them mentioned genealogy, and I think even just in looking at the march that the kids did from Mililani to Kukani Local, that was really something that was a motivating force for us, you know, as Kanaka, understanding who we are based in our genealogy. And that's something that's very different from going back to the point about race, you know, and the definition of Hawaiians as a race of people versus defining who we are in the context of our genealogy and connection to our kupuna. And I think that idea of genealogy is also really useful in thinking about these competing understandings. Really, they're sort of competing genealogies or competing representations of who we are as Kanaka Maoli. You know, where one is sort of an American legal genealogy that's saying a genealogy of laws, I mean, and a genealogy of, you know, legislations that is framing us as a race of people, defining us as, you know, one race in a sort of multi-ethnic nation under the United States. But that's not our genealogy. You know, our genealogy tells us that our people have been self-determining, self-governing here in the islands for hundreds of generations, and that we formalized that lahui as far as a nation and a kingdom in the mid-1800s. And there are many of us who continue that genealogy, you know, and who are continuing to try to assert that genealogy of our nationhood, of our lahui, of our independence. Both in that sort of political realm, but also in the cultural realm, like they were talking about with the Hālau or with you know, these various cultural and political events.
Because, you know, I mean, one very strong weapon, if you will, is the culture, and you gotta like be oppositional with it, in their face, you know, put it and say this is not a question of race, it's a question of what you were talking about. And I think this becomes a very strong political issue and way of fighting those attacks that whether we like it or not, they are happening against Kanaka Maoli, and then Kanaka Maoli will have to respond. I mean, one response you talked about is the march, for instance. You know, one response is coming to the defense of Native Hawaiian rights as understood by Native Hawaiians and so on. So, and to tell the people, you know, who pass these laws, you know, it's not a question of race, and you put it very well, why it isn't a question of race, and needs to be judged by different kind of criteria, the criteria that we, meaning Native Hawaiian Kanaka Maoli, understand, and that's the way it should be. I mean, if we talk about justice and peace and all that kind of good stuff, yeah. But here we are, though, and as I mentioned earlier, the opening salvo was the Rice versus Caetano. And it was really critical because some people were saying, you know, when the Rice versus Caetano was February 2000, you know, the Supreme Court rendered the decision that actually, you know, the 15th Amendment has been violated because, you know, it's not like not everyone was able to vote, you know, in the Office of Hawaiian Affairs things. Just like try to recall that kind of case. But the thing is that people said, well, this is a narrow decision. It didn't go to other things. I was thinking differently. I was thinking, in fact, this is, as I mentioned before, the opening salvo. Technically, it was a narrow decision, but a lot of things gonna happen because this is an attack if one were to understand it politically, you see. And exactly that's what happened. What happened after Rice versus Caetano? A whole slew of, you know, lawsuits were leveled. The Barrett, the Carroll suit, and the Arakaki, and, you know, and there's more coming along. And then now they are combating the Hawaiian Recognition Act, otherwise known as the Akaka Bill. Whatever one thinks about, you know, the Akaka Bill, whatever one thinks about it, the fact of the matter, it is, you know, indigenous rights are being are under attack at this point. So how to respond to that particular thing? So I want to go to a segment by Daviana McGregor. We did a while back a show on indigenous rights, and we play that segment, maybe it's a couple of minutes, and she talks about the question of the Rice versus Caetano first. So we'll see it, and then we'll have more discussion on that.
To rule on two issues, the 15th Amendment, which is what Marian talked about, that the voting process was unconstitutional, and that was ruled that it was in fact unconstitutional, and so the last election everyone voted and everyone could run. But the case originally also wanted the Supreme Court to say that under the 14th Amendment this was unconstitutional, it was discriminatory, that to even have an Office of Hawaiian Affairs was discriminatory, not just that the voting process was discriminatory. But the Supreme Court, fortunately, did not rule on that. They said, oh, we could go there, and they cited something that a law professor here had written and something that a student had written in the Yale Law Review, and they said, well, we could go there, but we're not going to go down that path at this time. But it left the question open, has the United States treated Native Hawaiians as a Native American tribe, and do the Native Hawaiians qualify as a Native Hawaiian tribe, and thus can the state also recognize Native Hawaiians as a tribe? So now, subsequently, of course, by raising that, we all anticipated there would be a subsequent challenge lawsuit to go after the 14th Amendment issues and say, yeah, Native Hawaiians are not Native Americans. They don't have a tribal status like Native Americans. Therefore, any kind of rights, special privileges for Native Hawaiians is unconstitutional. And of course, that has been filed in 2 cases, one by Mr. Barrett and one by Mr. Carroll, which is going to be heard in at least their attempt to put a restraining order on the state carrying out special programs for Hawaiians will be heard in March.
Yeah, that's good because we're gonna also be talking about the Barrett case. In fact. Yeah. So that's the question is first was Rice versus Cayetano and then the Barrett case, and the Barrett case was also in 2000. Filed by the same guy who did the Rice versus Cayetano lawsuit to, Jim Gomez, as I recall. And the 14th Amendment is very critical because, it's like the Equal Protection Clause, which is Section 1 under the 14th Amendment. But the good thing that Barrett case was thrown out, Carroll also, they threw it out, but these are lower courts, so we don't know what is going to happen after that. But the thing with the Kamehameha Schools, is really critical here, So could you, any of you, could you say more about those kinds of issues and how can one try and deal with those, counter those kinds of claims and attacks? Anyone?
Well, yeah, that was, as Noelani had mentioned, it kind of struck to the nerve of the Hawaiian community, especially with the Kamehameha Schools case. There are 2 cases came out in 2003, along with Arakaki, which is kind of the other progeny of the Rice versus Cayetano cases. And so it was really kind of a pivotal moment in many ways for galvanizing the community. The Kamehameha Schools case, 2 separate cases, the Mohica Cummings and then the Doe case, both challenging the admissions policy. Mohica Cummings settled out of court. Doe ruled on, then appealed, and then just recently given a decision at the Ninth Circuit Court going against Kamehameha. Yeah, with regards to the Rice case, because of the Rice case, and this is one of the flaws of the argument on the part of Kamehameha, is that they ceded race. They said, yes, it is a racial policy, because from what I've heard and understand, they didn't think they were going to win with their own argument for being seen as an indigenous people because they saw it fall in the Rice case. And being that they decided to go with the racial categorization, they were trying to argue that it was justifiable because it was an affirmative action program, and they lost that argument. Yeah. And so that was a difficult one because with regards to the school, it has so much history that that Noelani can speak to better than I. But it's in essence it's kind of one of those last tangible legacies of our ʻIʻi, of that whole history that is not only of the monarchy period, but of the Kamehamehas, of the genealogies of all of our people that have been handed down to us that we thought was untouchable because it's private. All these federal funding had been dropped. All these measures had been taken to protect it as one of the trusts that was meant for us following this long established relationship of the ʻIʻi providing for the maka'ainana, the monarchs providing for his citizens, the chiefs for the people, and so forth up until today. And it's, again, a very different history. It's not one of race and race-based programs. It's this other one of this genealogy, this history, this relationship of people, Aboriginal people during the kingdom, Indigenous people now, however you want to call it, to their own leaders and their chiefs. So that was you have these long histories that are get intertwined, especially again because of American imperialism and their own history of race that they bring with them, both as they entered the kingdom and as they came to occupy and exert power over the territory and state and today. And then this perverse twisting of civil rights law,
Right.
which is what the case was ruled on. It was a law to protect freed slaves from discrimination. And they entered into contracts, and all of a sudden, it's flipped around.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's difficult.
Yeah, I mean, one question about the Kamehameha schools. I mean, they are between a rock and a hard place. First of all, they cannot play except by the U.S. Constitution. That's the game, right? But the other hard place, you cannot, you cannot really win because, I mean, you're locked into it. So could you say something more about that or give us some history that relates to that insofar as Kamehameha schools are concerned?
With regard to the history of Kamehameha.
Yeah, as, in terms of fighting this kind of those two claims, the Cummings that was settled out of court, and then the other one, the John Doe one.
Well, it wasn't too surprising to me that they did concede the race issue, because historically Kamehameha has been an institution that has, in many ways, perpetuated that genealogy, as I was talking about, where Hawaiians are, one group of people, albeit with our own distinct culture, but a racial group within the United States, and has really worked to, over time, to sort of forget or push aside, marginalize that genealogy of our nationhood, of our ability to be self-determining. So that wasn't surprising, and I don't want to totally bash them about it, because there is a lot to lose, there is a lot at stake. Like Ty said, it's a trust, it's the only intact trust that we still have had access to, and that has been able to provide direct services to Hawaiians for over 100 years now.
Yeah, you gotta and so what emerges from this discussion is that you are as though you are walking on eggs insofar as Kamehameha schools are concerned. The shortcomings, that's what you were saying, and the mission of Kamehameha schools in terms of Americanization and whatever else it is. But then when it is under attack, they are between a rock and a hard place, but you have to support because of the reasons you mentioned. At the same time, there is some kind of critique of Kamehameha schools emerging from this discussion. Would you agree, Mai, on those kinds of issues?
Generally, yes, but what I first interpreted from the ruling for the Ninth Circuit, I didn't see it as a big surprise. I thought, if you look at history, I mean, there's a number of cases. They want to treat us like Indians with the Akaka Bill. Well, how do they treat the Indians?
We'll get to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, it's a long legacy of historical injustices done. Again, we witness it in our time, unfortunately for us. My take on it, though, however, is a little bit different.
No, go ahead.
I'm looking at the reaction that it caused. Again, the galvanization process that Ty had mentioned earlier. Maybe this is what we needed to wake up the populace, Hawaiians, Kanaka Maoli, to actually open your eyes and look what's going on. A lot of times people see Oha, they see Kauinoa, they see all these advertisements going out about what it is to be Hawaiian and how proud we are to be Hawaiian, when we have very limited information about the legal attacks, about our rights, indigenous, national, what have you, human rights. I think that the ruling, in a way, may serve in our favor, those who support the deoccupation of Hawaii, in a way that now it brings to the forefront, again, the only tangible thing that we have. They're threatening the only tangible thing we have, that we hold dear. I mean, we have OHA, which is created as a state and an American organization. We have DHHL, created by Congress, again, another American organization, with whose interest in mind? Well, look at the history. It's not Kanaka Maoli. But again, I do see this as a way of potentially galvanizing the situation, hopefully in our favor, so we can get a little bit more support.
Sure, yeah, that's good. I think we have a caller. Do we have a caller? Is there a caller? Oh, Ke'aumoku. Okay, Ke'aumoku.
Aloha Kako.
Aloha.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the panel, given the recent decision by the Circuit Court, Ninth Circuit, as the sole argument made by Kamehameha Schools, whether, as supporters claim, you agree that the Akaka Bill now is the only protection for Kamehameha.
Yeah, that's a good. Thanks, Keomoku. Anyone?
I don't think that the Akaka Bill is going to be that answer. And if we're going to get into that later, I can expand then.
But sure. But you go ahead. No. I don't want to stunt the development of it.
You know, if you look at history as the example, with the series of lawsuits that have more recently been kind of decided, and the development of programs through Congress with Hawaiian Homes, state programs with OHA, and again, this history of U.S. policy with regards to indigenous peoples in their own domain and with race, everything points to any attempts at creating a viable agency, entity, what have you, that'll afford the protection that I think Hawaiians really desire and want, is to be doomed. And I think, going with what ʻImai was saying, one of the perhaps silver linings to this cloud is that it maybe forces people to think outside of the race box and outside of some of the nation within the nation boxes, although there's a lot of people who are saying the opposite, right? But yeah, that's my...
Before we have another caller, Lucy Aku, is she on the line? You're on the, oh, okay. She asked a question, what is a Hawaiian? So since we're talking about Hawaiian, Kanaka, Maoli, so what is a Hawaiian? I mean, since we've been using this term. Who's a Hawaiian? What is a Hawaiian?
I think generally, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because I do want to get back to the Akaka Bill. I mean, when we talk about it, we're talking about the Kanaka Maoli, the indigenous people who have been born of this land, have lived here for hundreds of generations, as I mentioned. We're not talking about Hawaiian in the sense of anyone who lives in Hawaii. We're talking specifically about the indigenous people. Okay. I wanted to follow, though, on the Akaka Bill thing, because, you know, one of the things that I've seen already, and the bill hasn't even passed, is that, and hopefully from my perspective won't pass, is that it's been a dividing force in Hawaiian communities, and that it sucked a lot of time and energy and money and intellectual kind of, you know, mana into debating this one law, and that's all stuff that could be funneled into actual self-determination.
Instead of doing something else. I mean, however, this is the development of things. I mean, we cannot wish it away, etc. We have to handle it and deal with it, etc. And as you mentioned, like, we can make like something positive out of something negative. So that's. We have another caller. We'll take that call, John from the Big Island, and then we're gonna do other things on the Akaka Bill as well. So, John, you're on the air. Aloha, John.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah. Hi.
Aloha.
Aloha.
I just wanted to remind everyone that the princess is not an American. She is a Hawaiian subject. So for her will to be in the Ninth Circuit Court, it's in the wrong country.
Well, there you go. I mean, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Mahalo.
Mahalo. Yeah, I mean, that's another thing. That's what we're talking about it, but this is putting it in a different way, in the sense that why talk about race? I mean, isn't there any other kind of thing, you know? And you spoke eloquently about that. I want to go to another segment from Daviana McGregor. Now, in terms of the Akaka Bill, she's talking about, she supports the Akaka Bill, and she has a good way of putting it. So we'll see this segment, and then we can discuss more about that.
Session, because it's important to formalize the recognition that Hawaiians have already achieved. I think the main thrust of my testimony was to say there is adequate evidence of the recognition of Native Hawaiians as Native Americans, and that the U.S. Congress had established a trust relationship with Native Hawaiians. That there's over 183 public laws the U.S. Congress past recognizing Native Hawaiians as Native Americans and offering either funds or programs, services, or protection of Native Hawaiian rights and entitlements. There is the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, which is explicitly a trust relationship that was established between the U.S. Congress and the Native Hawaiians. But because it hasn't been formalized to say that we are a tribe, we have a tribal government, and that kind of formal recognition hasn't been given, that the Akaka legislation is an important step to accomplish that and protect us as long as we are still a part of the United States.
Yeah. So you do not preclude the question of independence at some future point. No. Okay, we have a caller. Hālau ku Māna. All right. We're in business here.
Hi. If the Akaka Bill passed, how would you feel and what would you do to make the best of it?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. But this is, if I may, a big if, because already it was derailed for the third time, this time by the Hurricane Katrina, right? I mean, has been derailed. But anyway, I didn't mean to take away from your manao on the issue. Noelani?
How would I feel? I think that's a good question. The follow-up part of that question is how would we make the best of it, really? You know, and I think the thing for us that we would need to do is, on one hand, we would need to continue to go to Washington, D.C. to rewrite or amend the legislation in a way that, as a people, we felt was adequate. But I think that, maintaining a lot of the same kinds of things that we're doing in our communities now, providing education, restoring fish ponds, restoring lo'i, restoring the halemua. I mean, making those things continue to be the focus of defining who we are, not some piece of federal legislation.
Yeah, that's good. Before we go further on this, and maybe we need to answer it more, this question from the student from Hālau ku Māna. But I want to play another segment of Daviana's discussion on the Akaka Bill. So we'll watch that because she has a good way of putting it. Yeah. Is it? Yeah.
And so that is an issue that everyone should participate in a process of nation building that everyone would have to rally around and support. And I guess why I favor is recognition of Native Hawaiians at this point, while we are still under the United States government, is that it is important for us as Native Hawaiians to stake out what do we believe are our national and ancestral lands. That is, our right is based on the fact that our people had established a nation before any of the settlers began to come to Hawaii. That is a vested right, a political right that was established and is recognized in international law, the rights of indigenous peoples to their pre-existing sovereignty and the national lands that are their ancestral lands at the time before contact. And for us as Native Hawaiians to secure those claims and those rights, we need to get it established under U.S. law right now, or we will, and if we don't get it established under U.S. law right now with all of the challenges, then that will be less recognition. Our rights and our claims will begin to diminish over the years that we don't have this kind of recognition. If we do have this recognition, we can already have it recognized that these are the ancestral lands that the Native Hawaiian people have a vested right to as descendants of these ancestors, that our right comes as a matter of inheritance. It's a matter of vested property rights and inheritance, not a matter of race, as the opponents of this would have us believe, but it's a matter of inheritance and property rights, that it is our inheritance from our ancestors to the claims we are making on these ancestral lands. And they need to be established under right as soon as possible, because the longer we wait, the more these lands are used for other purposes, the more they are misused and abused, as Marion points out, by the military as well. But if we can reclaim these lands and get it established as part of our rights as the Native Americans and Native Hawaiians under U.S. law, that would be a precedent. There's no guarantee that when there is an independent government, which will still have the same demographics, Hawaiians will probably still be 20% of the population. There's no guarantee that we're going to have any more rights under an independent government than we do under a United States government. There's the assumption that somehow Hawaiians will be in control of an independent government, but the demographics doesn't play that out, that Hawaiians would be the majority and therefore have the majority of political power and influence or control over land.
Yeah.
But if we had that recognition going into an independence mode, then that would be a precedent that the independent government would have to
Well, I think this is a powerful argument for the Akaka Bill, the Hawaiian Recognition Act. But any problems with this kind of argument? Anyone? That one?
Yeah, I have great love for Deviana and respect for her scholarship. And I also think that we need to understand that she is commenting on one of the earliest drafts of the bill. Every draft since then has subsequently lost more and more substance. And as recently as July 13, 2005, we have a memo coming from the U.S. Department of Justice. It's the first statement that people have been kind of waiting from the Bush administration on as to their views on the bill. And this was already on a very kind of diminished bill by the time they had commented on it. Deviana had mentioned the issue of the military. Well, one of the second comments made on this memo is that S-147, which is the bill number now, should be amended to make clear that the consultation process contemplated may not be applied so as to interfere in any way with the operation of U.S. military facilities on Hawaii or otherwise affect military readiness. The potential for such interference is well illustrated by litigation currently pending in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, Ilioulo Kalani Coalition versus Rumsfeld, challenging a proposed base expansion, the challenge to the Stryker Brigade.
Yeah.
And so right there we see that any bill that's going to pass will not have any chance of reclaiming those military lands anyway. If we look at the history of the ceding of the lands to Hawaii during statehood, there's a whole bunch of lands that got kept by the federal government for military purposes, such as Makua. Currently there's this EIS that they have out for comment. There's a whole host of issues dealing with the military. The UARC, I mean, it's the largest military expansion since the Second World War. They're claiming land left and right. They're trying to militarize the university.
With this,
and this bill is not going to stop it.
Right. Yeah. Well, this is rather interesting. Like, it's good that you mentioned the original Hawaiian Recognition Act is not the same as now, and also with all these things happening, memos and so on.
I should also mention, we don't know what the current version is because they have not published their revisions of the bill based on this memo.
But if anyone knows about passing laws in U.S. Congress, it's horse trading. By the time it finishes, it's nothing like it started to be. I mean, it's rather amazing. And I can tell you, I'm Palestinian originally, and I can tell you, like, in negotiations and this and that, by the end of it, you end up getting hardly anything at all. I can tell you, we've been there, you see. So this is a problem. Then the other thing is, although like Daviana's is a powerful argument, the fact of the matter is that if they give you the Akaka Bill, the Recognition Act, that means you can kiss independence goodbye, because that's it, because we have settled with the native Hawaiians, and that's end of the story so far as the United States is concerned. So this is a problem here. And then how much of indigenous rights is it going to protect is rather critical. This is one of the things you were mentioning. We have a caller, and then we can go. Kamale, sorry, from Nuuanu. You're on the air.
Hi, I was wondering what Ko'inoa is about.
Hello?
Hi, I'm wondering what Ko'inoa is all about.
Oh.
Ko'inoa.
Oh, sorry. I read what was there on the board. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I think, as one of our students has brought up, Ko'inoa is a big topic going around nowadays, especially with youth. I think initially Ko'inoa was set up as a register or roster of Native Hawaiians willing to participate in a government that I guess would have to be created through federal recognition. Ko'inoa has been criticized by many people because it's a baby of Oha, first of all. Secondly, the way in which that they're sort of producing momentum for this registry is not through education. It's through material. I think you're going to see a lot of Ko'inoa shirts going around, a lot of bumper stickers going around, and it's more just mass media given to our children with the false pretense that if you don't sign up for this, then you're not Hawaiian, which is not what we want our kids to think. They're Hawaiian because their genealogy says so, not because a bumper sticker or a shirt says you are. Ko'inoa is actually a smaller, yet is another arm of the Oha's initiative to support the Akaka Bill. Again, I think that the Akaka Bill doesn't speak for self-determination, rather it creates predetermination. It legalizes the illegal overthrow and subsequent occupation of the Hawaiian Kingdom. To this day, once the Akaka Bill passes in the Congress of America, in their eyes, in their books, it'll be made legit. Luckily, there are people out there who have been able to attain some of the information that creates a totally different paradigm from the colonized, which we spent about 30 years on, talking about colonization, where now we have this idea of occupation, and knowing that through the Anglo-Franco Proclamation in 1843, with the U.S. as one of the signers of the treaty, along with France and Britain, we know that Hawaii was its own kingdom, equal to the United States, Spain, what have you. This sort of changing the entire paradigm, going back to our other students' question about what does this do if the Akaka Bill is passed. Legally, it does nothing because it's a American domestic law on Hawaiian Kingdom, which legally in international law and in the eyes of Hawaiian nationals, it has no bearing. Realistically, what it does for us on a daily basis, sure, it changes. It changes our ability to say no to further military expansion, to the continued destruction of our sites, of our iwi kupuna, of our moipu, of our sites. I mean, this is who we are. We're talking about identity. They're destroying our identity slowly but surely. Right now on Oahu, there's 25% of military, installations just on Oahu alone, and they're growing. They gave back Ho'olave about a year ago. They gave back Ho'olave, and in lieu of the strikers coming, they just took a sizable amount out of Pohakulo and Honouliuli, which is what the Kuikapona March that took place 2 Saturdays ago. September 4th. That was in direct opposition to the striker brigade. And it's 300 vehicles along with the hundreds of soldiers with their families, the burden it's going to cause on the environment, the educational system down in Lelehua, which most of these kids will have to kind of disseminate themselves through. It just caused a whole host of problems. I'm not even talking about traffic.
Okay. We have one more caller, and then we can talk more. And we have a few more minutes left. Wes from I don't know where, but he will tell us. Wes, you're on the air. Aloha.
Aloha, Kako.
Aloha.
Fellow graduate of Thai over there, and you know who I am. Right. Anyway, mahalo for all three of you. It's refreshing to see our generation out there discussing and debating the issues. Thank you to our kupuna. We take much mana from them. my comment or question is that, are there any new thoughts coming from our generation that we are going to proceed with in the future to hold out the efforts that have been laid before us? I know that we struggle with the things that are here in front of us now, but then what is our next step as the leaders of tomorrow?
Okay, great, mahalo. So we have a few more minutes, so if we will quick about that, but it's a very important question.
Thanks, Wes, for that call. I want to reiterate what Noelani had mentioned, that despite all these other lawsuits and governments that come and go, we are who we are. We are who we were. We're going to continue to be who we are and will be in the future. We define ourselves through our genealogy, through our history, through our knowledge, through our relationships to each other, to the land, to the kupuna. And it's with the further kind of dialogues that are created between one another that we're going to be able to work together no matter what comes our way to kind of chart our own future. With regards to specific ideas, as ʻImai said, there's a lot of discussion now dealing with looking at the Hawaiian Kingdom as a model for pursuing the restoration process, the deoccupation process. A lot of writing has come out of a new journal called the Hawaiian Journal of Law and Politics. At the same time, you still have efforts on the international front with regards to collaborations with other indigenous peoples. And I don't discount colonial theory. I think it's important because we felt the effects of colonization, even if legally it didn't happen. So I think that's really important, and it's helped us to reconnect in other ways with other people. And these are the kind of the other areas outside of the Akaka Bill, other than that kind of internal recognition under the U.S. law that people are discussing. And in kind of setting the foundation is that cultural development, the education, which these two are the forefront of with Hālau Kumana, and talking about maybe ways of changing Kamehameha.
Yeah. Noelani, you want to add more to this? Or?
Yeah, I think, we see many different instances of young people of our Lahui building the base for our independence. And so by independence, I don't just mean, and self-determination, I don't just mean the political state of independence, but the ability to provide for ourselves, to be self-sustaining, to do all the things that our kupuna did, feed ourselves, educate ourselves, clothe ourselves, and you see that with communities having various charter schools, with communities restoring fish ponds, restoring lo'i, like I said, just basically taking charge and providing for the basic needs of our people, which is the foundation, economic independence.
Yeah, well, what I wanted to say, following ʻImai, for all that to happen, you need another paradigm. This is your word. And to do so, elite politics, you talked about changing Kamehameha perhaps too, so elite politics has to, just go away, because you cannot have elite politics and think of the person, say in Waianae, as your brother or sister, unless you see that you are all, of the same people, etc., same class of people, in fact, etc. So I think that's very important. We didn't touch much on the question of military issues, etc. But of course, you mentioned some of that, which leads me to the question of, the oppositional situation between Native Hawaiian rights and military issues, because military issues means land and so on. So anyway, I thank you very much for sharing with us your mana'o, and thanks for our viewers, and we'll see you next month, October, and hopefully we will have more sometime this year on indigenous rights, not necessarily in October, but later on, and we shall call upon our friends and you folks to help us have the viewers, understand more about those kinds of important issues for Hawaii politics. Mahalo. Good night.